Hi guys, so we're back for the last lesson of the week this week, and we're looking at the second lot of strategies. So key knowledge point 5, looking at materials management, strategies to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of operations related to materials, including forecasting, master production schedule, materials requirement planning, and just-in-time. Sounds a bit daunting, but it's actually a pretty straightforward key knowledge point, and by the end of this lesson, you'll have been able to work your way through it, I'm pretty confident. So if we have a look at the key knowledge points, we can see there's a fair bit of red there now. So we're covering off the second lot of strategies today. Next week, well, we're still in remote learning. We'll knock off the second part of strategies. So the strategies related to quality and the strategies related to waste minimisation. That'll just leave us two key knowledge points for when we get back to school. So the first week back, we'll be able to easily finish key knowledge points 8 and 9 in our respective classes, and then we'll have the week in week 2 to do all of the revision leading up to the SAC on the Friday the 5th of June, to complete operations management. So we're on target. Rightio, so let's get into it. So what is materials management? Simply, it's the strategy that manages the use, storage and delivery of materials to ensure the right amount of inputs are available when required in the operations system. So we're looking at the material side of things, their inputs that go into our operations system, and the storage and delivery of them as inputs into the system. So as a beginning point, all manufacturers have large amounts of materials on hand, and collectively those materials are known as inventory. So inventory comprises raw materials and component parts which go into the system as inputs into the operations management system. We have unfinished production. So the factory may have shut down for the day, production hasn't been completed, so there are unfinished items. So these continue later on in the transformation process. And then we have finished goods that have been through the operations management system and have started as inputs. They've gone through the transformation process. They've come out the other end as outputs, and they are still being stored in our production facility, but they haven't been shipped yet to the final wholesalers for sale to the end customers. So all of these areas, raw materials, unfinished production and finished goods, need to be stored. So management of materials is vital. Now, the study design specifies materials. So if you have a look at the arrow, we're looking at the raw materials and component parts, which are the items going into the inputs into the system. So all of this slide presentation will focus on the raw materials components, but just be aware that there are other components within operations management. They all make up inventory. They all require materials management to ensure that they're all kept safe and managed properly. But our discussions today will focus on the raw materials side, which go through the system as inputs. So if we have a look at what managing materials is all about, it's about managing the way that materials are received and stored, and making sure that the right amount and quality of inputs are available in the operations system as and when needed. So when managing materials, we need to take into account the raw materials we've already got in stock, pretty logical. The time taken to order new supplies, logical as well. The availability of materials from suppliers, suppliers may not have the materials we need. Negotiation of acceptable prices. Prices might have gone through the roof and we can't afford to buy them at those particular prices, otherwise we won't make a profit. And also delivery lead times. They're all things that need to be considered as part of materials management. And then if we get our materials management wrong, if we order too much stock, we're going to run out of storage because it has to be stored somewhere securely, safely, to be used. Stock can pass its use by date, so if it goes off, if we're involved in producing items with a use by date, whether it's foodstuffs or whatever it is, if it goes off, then we have to throw it out. It's a waste of money. And if we order too much, money's tied up, so our dollars are trapped in stock that we can't use in other areas of the business. On the other side, if we order too little stock, the production line grinds to a halt. If we don't have the raw materials to go into production, so we don't have all of our inputs, then we can't do the processes part of the operation management system. So the production grinds to a halt. That means customers' orders remain unfilled. That means the business reputation can collapse because we're not providing what we're promising to our customers, and our customers may look at going to other suppliers. So getting our materials management right is vital for the successful operation of our business. So let's look at some of the strategies to assist the management of materials. There's four that are listed in the key knowledge point in the study design, and the four that we need are forecasting, master production schedule, materials requirement planning, and inventory control. And we'll go through the four. The benefits are that if you get this right, they're all linked, so it's pretty straightforward to walk through. We can see this diagram out of our textbook. Over on the left-hand side, we've got customer orders coming in, and we've got our current inventory levels, the materials that we're holding. What we do then is we forecast. We start with forecasting. That then leads to, as a result of our forecasts, it leads to us producing a production schedule for the factory. From that, we look at how much materials we need, and then once we get materials actually purchased and into our factory, we have to then control them. So that's where we look at inventory control through just in time. So it's a logical flow from one to the other. In the study design, we're looking at each one individually. Each one is an individual strategy. The reality is, in real life, a business or a producer will probably use all four of the strategies to manage their materials through their workplace. So we start with forecasting. So forecasting involves predicting what materials will be required and in what quantities based on past orders of customers, what season it is, if it's a seasonal type of business. So it's predicting what you are going to need to produce in order to satisfy all of your orders. So from that respect, you can then forecast what materials are needed in your inputs in order to produce the correct volume of outputs. So the forecaster needs to consider, this could be the operations manager. It's more likely to be someone who is a sub-manager under him who is delegated, but there could be a materials manager who runs this particular part of the organisation, of the operations system, but he would report back to ultimately the operations manager who's responsible for the entire process. But he would be involved in the forecasting, needs to consider the supplier delivery times we've already spoken about. Are our materials coming from locally, interstate or international? So there'll be different lead times as to when supplies are going to arrive. You'll need to consider price changes. So there may be, if you're purchasing materials from overseas, there may be movements in the exchange rate between Australia and, say, the US, which is going to make those materials far more expensive in the future. So the forecaster needs to consider that, whether he needs to order more now to take advantage of lower prices. He also needs to take into consideration market condition changes. If you look at the COVID-19 situation where demand for certain products has plummeted, you wouldn't want to have a supplier or a manufacturer who has all of the raw materials stuck in his factory, potentially looking at wastage and losing a lot of money because he's got materials there which he can't produce goods from. And he also needs to consider the forecast of special customer demand times. So at Christmas and Easter, if you've got a product that's in demand at those particular times, there may be greater demand for the output, so there'll be additional inputs of materials will be required. So for each of these strategies, we're going to look at some of the advantages and disadvantages, just so you've got those if you're ever asked for them in a particular SAT question or exam at the end of the year. So in relation to forecasting, the advantages, you can anticipate seasonal changes and adjust orders to save on costs and wastage. This is based on past, evidence from the past, so orders from past years. That's how you build your forecasting for the future, past performance, so you can anticipate seasonal changes, and you can help to prevent over ordering, which then takes up storage space within your factory, which obviously would be limited. Disadvantages are the running backwards, looking over your shoulder. The forecasting is based on past events, so if you're making your forecast on past events and then something unexpected happens, such as COVID-19, it can still catch you out because you're looking at your normal operations rather than unexpected events. It requires also a lot of time to anticipate, track and analyse all potential impacts on the supply chain. So you need to take into consideration the ability of your suppliers to supply you with materials, the lead time, all of those sort of things. So there's a lot of paperwork involved in getting your forecasting relatively accurate. So that's part one, or number one, of your strategies. Okay, so you've done your forecasting, and the next step is the master production schedule. Again, this is a this is this stands separately from the forecasting as well. So you can run as this is a strategy by itself if you want to use the master production schedule, but normally it works in with forecasting. So it's the who, what, when, where, how, and which of playbook of materials management. So what the master production schedule is telling you who. So what staff are needed to do the work, what goods are to be produced, when the production is to take place, where production is to take place, how production will occur, and which materials are required. That's what a master production schedule is. If you look at the reality of operations management and manufacturers, they run multiple products. So they need to schedule products at different times and for different production runs based on demand. It's not all based on one particular product. So that requires changing the layout potentially of the factory to run a different product. So all of that, if the operations manager has enough information through forecasting to produce a master production schedule, he can then work in and run the most efficient uh, components of products through his factory. So the advantages of the master production schedule, we're looking at the advantages being it determines very accurate ordering, quantities and timings, so you can avoid the wastage, time delays and costs. It's very clear to all staff what the processes and the sequences are within the factory. They can look at a master production schedule, which is normally available for all staff to see. They know exactly what they're doing, where they have to be, and what products are going to run through their operations management system. It's very good for standardised production. So if you're running cars or Coca-Cola, etc., running bottles through, a standard product running through a production line is very good for master production schedules. It's easy for new staff to learn the routines of an organisation, and generally there are reduced general wastage as a result of the master production schedule. The disadvantages come if it's initially time consuming and expensive to track and set up. There's a lot of paperwork put in place, tracking and working it out, normally with a computer system as well. Writing up the manual for how the production system works. It's hard to account for every situation. So again, it's a situation where it's based on that looking over your shoulder type of principle, where you're running future production based on past results. It doesn't take into account variations to those results, so it's not very flexible. So they're the disadvantages of a master production schedule, which tie in pretty much with forecasting. So our third strategy is materials requirement plan, and this works in very closely with the master production schedule. So it's used to determine what needs to be ordered and when. So once you've got your plan, your schedule, and you know exactly what you're going to produce, then your materials requirement plan is it's breaking down all of the component parts or the materials needed to produce all of the items that are on the master production schedule. So that's what the materials requirement plan does. And the aim is to minimise storage costs. You know what you're producing, so you know what you need materials-wise, minimise wastage, and minimise idle machines. If you've got machines that aren't working, then that's costing the business productivity, or you know, it lacking efficiency in particular areas. And you then order the materials with sufficient time so they're delivered so they can plug into the master production schedule. So the materials requirement plan shows the stock required for the quantity determined in the master production schedule. So that's why they go hand in hand. The stock of materials that you've already got on hand, and then that works out based on what you've got on hand, what you then need to order to cover the master production schedule. So the advantages and disadvantages of the materials requirement plan. Advantages are there's a reduction in wastage, reduction in storage space taken up, and reduction in idle machines. You can see the advantages across all of the strategies here are all pretty much the same. So just be aware that we're focusing on eliminating waste, reducing storage space, and ensuring that our machines aren't idle. On the disadvantage side, again, the cost associated with setting these particular strategies up can be significant. So initially expensive to set up a dedicated system which can accurately track materials through the site. So that's the disadvantage of the materials requirement plan. So once we have orders of materials coming into the factory or the facility, we then need to control the inventory. So the best way to do it, or the way that we're looking at from a strategy point of view in operations management, is using something called just-in-time, which links in with the other three strategies that we've already looked at. So just-in-time aims to synchronize your ordering, so automatically the computer alerts the system that resources are running low of a particular material, and it gives the operators sufficient time for ordering and delivery of the new resource that's required. So what that means is it's just in time. So the order from suppliers arrives just in time to cover, or just in time as you are running out of that particular material in your factory. So in this theory, it should eliminate all waste and reduce to an absolute minimum the amount of inventory that you're holding of particular materials. So just in time, the advantages here are when working perfectly, this should lead to elimination of all waste. There shouldn't be any waste if your forecasts are correct and your material and your production plan are working correctly. There shouldn't be any waste. There should be no raw material wastage. The bare minimum of cash trapped in raw materials. This should only be a bare minimum because you should be able to reduce your stock levels accordingly because you know exactly what's required from a materials point of view, and you ensure that new orders arrive just as they are needed. So that means that storage space is limited as well because you don't need to store as much materials, and you don't have idle machines because there's always enough materials to keep the system operating. However, the disadvantages are that it's hugely reliant on suppliers to deliver on time all the time. So if there's failure to do this very quickly, then the whole production line gets shut down. So the theory about just in time is fine, but the disadvantage is significant. So what normally happens is that organisations run with a buffer of materials, and they never drop below that buffer. So that buffer is there. It may be 10% or 20% of their normal levels, which is always there to cover them for delays from suppliers or unavailability of materials. So just be aware that just in time in theory is fine, but there are disadvantages, and businesses normally put some other practices in place to ensure that they're not left without materials. Okay, so that's it for today. The case study question that you need for today to cover materials management are questions 6 and 7. The textbook to read through is page 230 to 234, and questions 1 to 11 and questions 15 to 17 on page 236. You can also then go and have a look at Ed Rollo. So have a great weekend, everybody. Look forward to going through the last couple of strategies areas next week, and then look forward to seeing you the following week back in class at Mazenod. All the best and bye for now.